Using a camera was almost a relief. It interposed a slight barrier between myself and the horror in front of me. Margaret Burke-White, on her photos of Buchenwald. Photography is a marvelous discovery, a science that has attracted the greatest intellects, an art that excites the most astute minds, and one that can be practiced by any imbecile. Gaspard Felix Tournachon. Chapter 4. Down by the jetty. I see two small boats a few hundred feet from shore riding on heavy ocean surf, with Coast Guard helicopters hovering above them, periodically drifting off to nearby headlands, en route to an emergency or just hanging out. It's sometimes hard to tell. I've seen them both practicing rescue operations and conducting real ones. Sometimes they zip by in the surf on ATVs without time to chat. Some people take their boats into heavy waves for fun, unwittingly reincarnating an adventure sport that coast Indians used to play with specially designed, two-way canoes. I am not thinking about the ocean in the slightest when the sneaker wave that finally gets me, my sneaker wave, does so, leaving me about 2 seconds to contemplate what will happen when the wall of water, 20 feet away now, and now 10, hits me. There is no way at all to contemplate the frigidity of the water that nails me, even in retrospect. For perhaps the first time in my life, I find out what genuine physical shock does to the brain. It is hard to brace oneself using only one's legs, but I nonetheless assume an awkward pose in the 2 seconds I have, perhaps looking a bit like a plastic army man before the sun and the boys in short pants with magnifying glasses get to me. I am knocked onto my knees and the force of the wave carries me inland until I can at last rise to my feet, submerged to my waist, and prepare for the worst moment, and one that I have time to see coming. I look back to the landline and it is absurdly far away and there is nothing but fizzy blue-white water between me and the first clumps of beached grass in the extended distance. All that water has to come back the way it arrived. The feeling is like driving to an early morning root canal. Strong legs and the advantage of a state of near panic are what save me. The volume of the water and the physics in play are trying to pull me out to sea, and while I stagger and fall a time or two and all the pushing with my legs rapidly tires me, I am fighting less water with each moment that passes, allowing a certain volume of water to move past me without being myself moved. In the end it comes down to basic mathematics again. Most people who have lived on the coast and like to walk on beaches can probably tell similar stories. Some, of course, cannot. While I am staying at South Beach, a vacationing couple are washed off the jetty and I watch the Coast Guard search for them. It is a long search that doesn't end well, but I am reminded to be careful each time I come to the jetty by the sight of makeshift memorials such as those often seen along roads. I watch a chubby, almost naked middle-aged man stomp bravely into the churning waves on the first cloudy day in weeks, making it the sea a countercharge of fun. He ducks under the waves like a surfer waiting for a good ride until an especially large wave tumbles him sideways and holds him under 3 feet of water, for about 3 seconds. When he wanders out of it all about 10 seconds later, his silhouette is sheepish, quick alternate glances thrown back over each shoulder time and again. Dripping and with his head down but his chin up for the benefit of the progeny of this patriarch. They applaud him as they watch him emerge. Lo-fi humidifiers. I am sleepwalking through an afternoon in one of the coast's few cities, haphazardly wandering, killing precious time as if it were free, as if life weren't short enough. The tenor of the day is not far from the sluggish late spring afternoons I remember from my summers in Arizona, when in the triple-digit glare of sunshine that is never broken by clouds, a siesta can last all day. This is what is happening now, nothing, but I can't blame the heat because there is none. I am lazing through a movie matinee sort of day, the kind of afternoon one is meant to permanently abandon after college except in the rare pseudo-sitcom-esque era inhabited by the temporarily unemployed and maritally alienated, by those just out of jail or returned from a war. A brief return to the hazy afternoons of early post-adolescence, popcorn and laundromats, arcade games at a strip mall and a slab of greasy pizza, coin-op everything. It is a day out of time and I am floating, like the day Michael Jackson died. I enter a thrift store that used to be a mechanic's garage. I trip over grates in the stained cement floor that conceal what used to be a grease monkey's pit. A few sparrows flit about in the beams of the high, skylit ceiling, but the big space is so choked with stuff, junk, to some, that the effect is cozy and warm. I begin to browse through the book section, even the lowliest thrift store has one, and forget, as I always do, what I was actually shopping for. The books are old and utterly random. They smell nice, if a bit musty and moisture-bound. As I leaf through them I take a passing interest in topics far removed from my usual fare. Things I had not been thinking about before waking. Romance on high seas and in back alleys. Encyclopedia of coinage and stamps. Pictures of various breeds of horses with erections, artillery manuals, and other well-worn books for whom I can't imagine there ever being a readership, and stray acquaintances that I like to imagine as the authors. It is typical of the day, bumbling through a grab bag of ideas, considering taking several home with me, but books are expensive weight-wise in a lifestyle like mine. And I know that if I buy one I will buy two and then 10. I flip through a stack of old long-playing albums instead, but I don't even own a record player anymore, like most of the patrons here. When the clerk comes over to chat I am rummaging through a big pile of small electronics. There is a matching set of dusty old humidifiers which remind me that I am looking for a small ceramic space heater, along with 3 speed settings and an oscillation switch. One of the humidifiers has a stereo headphone jack and volume control on the side, and scan, reverse, and fast-forward buttons, but no tuning dial or place to insert a cassette or CD. For the life of me I'm still not sure why. The faded stickers that warn about various health hazards of the product are silent on the topic of its purpose. Do you know what these headphone jacks are for? I ask the clerk, who shakes her head. Now we are both stumped. We check other things to see if they also have jacks, humidifiers and purifiers, space heaters of the type I am not looking for, but none of them do. Of the twin mystery products I will get no closure. The clerk sends me on my way with another little enigma. I don't even know if they work, she says. Postscript. I will stop again on a whim at the same store 2 years later, and the mystery humidifiers are still there. Still maybe but maybe not working but definitely still waiting to find a home. I notice a detail I hadn't before, a battery compartment so that they will still function if the power goes out. Tsunami. waiting for a disaster that has already happened, or waiting for the same disaster to happen again. I sleep like a rock, rather, and worse than a rock. Rocks can, with a little effort, at least be moved. I am apparently utterly immobile and immovable, unwhackable in spite of efforts I am told about when at last, in my own time, I open my eyes. Most days require considerable expense of time and coffee before I am truly awake following a sound slumber, and I usually don't remember a thing. Maybe the rock metaphor is more apt than I suppose. After all turns out to be cold and still in the pre-dawn air as I open my door on the park ranger who is pounding, miraculously, it seems, loudly enough for me to hear it, on the side of my trailer, at 4:30, that's AM, but I don't remember opening the door itself, just everything that follows. Something in his voice carries the same rude immediacy of boiling coffee, genuine fear, and his words slap me in the face with all the urgency of the present tense. An earthquake just hit Japan, he says. Thousands are dead and one of their nuclear reactors is melting down. There's a tsunami, and it's coming our way. No one knows what, if anything, is coming. But there is something in the way he pauses before he goes, asks me twice if I understand that he and everyone else is leaving the campground and I'm the last to be roused before they go, and the way he holds eye contact an unusually long time before leaving, looking widely into my own sleep-starved eyes longer than is customarily considered casual, or comfortable. I get the message. I tell him I will be at the evacuation site when the time comes. I have 3 hours because the tidal waves are still racing across the great ocean. I say goodbye and hastily begin to brew a half pot of coffee, to go along with the breakfast fare I didn't order, a fat, sloppy slice of early morning doom. My first thoughts are for myself and my cats, but we won't be in real danger. The evacuation site is just over the bridge in Newport, on a high piece of ground overlooking the jetties at the mouth of the Umpqua River. The trailer, and all my possessions inside it, is a tougher problem to solve. Not only are my most critical things traveling with me, but so are the accumulated photos and notes I would like to turn into a book someday. And the trailer is in a tsunami zone, an area guaranteed to be obliterated when the big one comes. Like the ranger said, at this point, no one knows. I compromise and leave the trailer but take my notebooks and one backup hard drive with most of the shots I have taken, having already crossed the country with them. The cats are an annoyance, but that is all. They are veterans of the road, unfazed and unfazable. As my truck warms I carry them out one by one and stuff them inside it, along with a clean litter box and some dry food. To be foodless for even a few hours being an injustice beyond contemplation. As expected, we're the last to leave the campground. In the dead of winter the place is only about 5% occupied. But the sudden lack of all campers whatsoever, the hastily abandoned trailers and half-empty sites, the owner of one motorhome has disconnected from the water and electric hookups and left the cables in a heap, leveling blocks still in place on the parking apron, and creepy stillness of the dawn air put a shiver in my spine. It is as if the tsunami has already struck, or at least half-struck. I lean a bit harder on the accelerator of my groggy pickup, merge onto a busy Highway 101 and roll over the bridge, shielding my eyes from the sun rising over the mountains on one side of me and glancing warily at the sea rising on the other. The scene at the evacuation site is more that of a carnival than a disaster in progress. It is feeling with people who would otherwise be at work or still at home in bed. The day will be spectacular and dry, on this side of the ocean if not the other, under a sparkling midwinter sun that warms the air quickly. Many will spend the rest of the unseasonable morning on vacation, it's Tsunami Day, not unlike the days of snow elsewhere in the country that sometimes force schools to close early or never open. Not only is the high ground here relatively safe from all but the biggest tsunamis, but it is a most picturesque spot to ride out a natural disaster. Both the low, random dunes by the North Jetty and the jumble of rocks and wooding pilings composing the South Jetty typically provide good photo opportunities at sunset or sunrise of perhaps the most photogenic, and most photographed, bridge on the entire coast. Old Town Harbour in the background, perhaps a few silhouettes of yawping seals for, here I wait for a tsunami but have brought my camera, of course, as has nearly every other human being I see, like the opening or closing ceremony of an Olympiad. Photography would seem to be an oddball in this regard. I doubt painters often have to worry about hordes of lay painters showing up with their own canvases and easels when they are contemplating their masterpieces. But photography is easy and cheap, like rock and roll, so I try to talk about apertures and the like with my fellow evacuees. I arrive after most of the tourists but before most of the locals, many of whom must have found other places to be. Newport is a bigger city than this, even in January. Many who do show up have clearly just left the highway while on their way somewhere else. To watch the water or the people, it seems to be a bit of both. Many sip coffee and scarf down breakfast from cellophane wrappers held to their faces. Most of the cars parked alongside me or winding slowly through the park of pets inside of them. Yipping and howling dogs and cats sit uncomfortably on laps or press faces, paws, and tongues to the inside of windows. In an ideal world, my own cats sit quietly purring, cozy and curled up asleep in the back seat. In this less than ideal one they crawl into and over everything in the small space of the truck, clawing like rats. Torgo howls with anxiety and recrimination like he always does at times of stress. He has joined the Pets United Tsunami Chorus, lead tenor and the lungs to prove it. A lighthouse and rather martial-looking Coast Guard station overlooked the little cliffside park. On the steps stand a group of people in business suits whom I take to be meteorologists from the Weather Service or specialists from the Marine Centre across the harbour. Scientists and government agents chatting coolly and casually about the situation. But from the Coast Guard tower men and women in hats and uniforms keep one eye on the ocean through binoculars and another on us. Police cars move slowly amongst us, both as fellow evacuees and fellow gawkers. I fidget. Wading is no longer my style. Nonetheless, we all wait and watch the sea. We watch and wait and watch. As the moment of estimated arrival of the first wave comes and goes without incident, it begins to become apparent that this won't be the big one and may barely qualify as a little one. We begin to look a little less at the waves and a little more at one another. "Do you see anything?" a woman indiscriminately asks all of us milling nearby. "It looks like the tide is going out," a voice says weakly. "Does the horizon look a little weird?" you asks another. The waterline has indeed receded by about 100 feet, and the horizon line is indeed a little weird, although exactly what has changed is much harder to define. It may be that a recession of the water, the deep inhalation a tsunami takes before the first wave strikes, has altered its depth such that the waves begin to break at different points, closer or further from observers on land, and an optical illusion occurs, or seems to occur to those actively looking for such things. As the first waves arrive, other odd things begin to happen. They begin to break in strange places and at atypical angles. Rivers begin to flow backwards. It just looks weird, says the woman next to me. Nature shouldn't look like that. I smile. It is exhilarating, actually, like the world has not quite been turned upside down but shaken slightly as if in a snow globe. They have not yet begun to assess the damage done to Japan, and at any rate I have been oblivious to what may be happening to others ever since early this morning, when my day began unexpectedly too. For now it is sort of fun. It is like a low tide followed immediately by a high tide, repeated several times in a somewhat randomized cycle. I liken a mild tsunami to a series of flash floods. There is suddenly much more water than there was a moment before, and this inflow accounts for the brief spasms of violence while the water level stabilizes and the waterline reaches its apex and begins to recede once again. The tsunami I am witnessing has crossed an ocean and devastated a nation. We will learn over the days and weeks to come just how destructive it was. When the sun rises in Japan and the scale of the disaster begins to dominate the 24-hour news cycle. But here and now in Newport the tail end of the tsunami is barely noticeable as a series of little oddities in the behavior of the harbor and the river where it meets the sea. The mildness reminds me of the way that the atmosphere grows cooler and the sunlight less intense in the midst of a partial solar eclipse. The symptoms of the event are evident even when the event itself is elusive. It is hard to tell what, but something is a little off, and suddenly before me is an otherwise inexplicable function of nature and mathematics. I wonder if this is how the ancients felt. As I watch the sea slosh between the jetties and in and out of the harbor, I try to find out what else might be going on, or if the fun might be over. I have been tuning my radio periodically to a morning zoo team from Portland, far removed from any repercussions for their personal safety, checking in with disembodied voices who jabber in the same incoherent tones regarding the disaster that they use for their advertising plugs. They repeat warnings about the tsunami as they are received, and as required by law and conscience, but they are betrayed by their own zaniness. As a major radio station they would have had access to hard facts and instant updates all morning. They've known all along that this isn't the big one. They've been milking it for the novelty value. Shame on them. I browse to one of the music stations still programming per schedule before I switch the radio off completely. Postscript: the tsunami washed to sea much of the infrastructure of the Japanese coast, piers, boats, houses, cars and motorcycles, miscellaneous chunks of plastic and wood and styrofoam. Whatever floats and doesn't disintegrate in seawater, that is currently floating like shaving scum on the surface of the Pacific Ocean, coming this way. The Japanese current naturally brings debris to the Oregon coast. Ancient Japanese castaways adrift from a shipwreck, if able to survive the crossing, would have ended up here. Over the coming months and years this debris will all wash up on the beaches, a process that has already started. Oregon state parks have set up special collection points for beachgoers to bag and drop tsunami debris as if it were a dog poop, a necessary precaution to attempt to halt the invasive mussels and sea stars that have crossed the ocean clinging to the sides. Poison beer. I like to use the mom-and-pop grocery stores in small towns when the prices are reasonable, which they are more often than one might suppose, or they have better food. Many such shops keep fresh fruit, vegetables, bread, and seafood year-round, which is worth the extra expense in winter. Before the farmers' markets are open, I often have little choice. Mega super giganto groceries are few and far between here, confined to the larger cities. Even when they are available, I like to use the smaller stores, where each transaction means more. I am passing the meat section. The butcher trims and partitions fresh meat in front of customers' eyes through a window placed too high for small faces to see through. In one such store on the north coast in a small town through which no one doesn't pass directly, the main street is just a street, not a numbered highway. I'm looking for a cold beer. The beer sections here, even in gas stations and convenience stores, but especially in little markets like this one, are rich in bright colors and colorful names. The small brewers of the area draw the eye with clever product packaging and nomenclature, and branding, of course, logos that mix pastels and neon, bold block lettering and postmodernist lowercase, monkeys and Indian symbology and abstracted designs that must be studied carefully, presumably while sipping the suds within, to be visually comprehended. If done well, these are products that are genuinely fun to shop for, and especially consume. A girl of about 4 is shopping with her mother while 2 other unaffiliated shoppers mill nearby. We're all shopping for beer. Can't we just get a different kind of beer for Daddy? The girl asks her mother. The woman giggles nervously. The rest of us exchange knowing looks and smiles. Okay, what kind should we get? She asks her daughter. She points at a 6-pack from Rogue, a brewer based in Newport. The poison kind, the girl suggests. She is pointing at a product with a cartoon of a discombobulated drunken skeleton on it called Dead Guy Ale, and one of my favorites. 12% of all beer consumed in Oregon has been brewed here, a $2 billion industry within the state, employing 5,000 people at last count. The microbrewing scene has thrived thanks to a state law that allows beer to be brewed, sold, and consumed on the same property. The law resulted in shelf space for small brewers to compete with the large national brewers, and a spirit of competition has resulted in a perennial renewal of innovation. Not only do the most popular microbrews compete directly with one another year-round, but seasonal releases, and other, more experimental limited releases, have resulted in scenarios whereby the beer section at my local grocery store changes with the weather and angle of the sun. I have my favorite summer and winter beers now, which may seem a bit pretentious, but there it is. It is a perfectly formed organic chain of production and commerce, it seems. Hops are grown locally. They rise all summer in the Willamette Valley, where they ripen as conical flower tops under shade screens suspended from networks of poles and wires that remind me of the electrical grids on the ceilings of bumper car arenas. The hops are fermented by people who are highly passionate about the quality of their products, and the beer is sold fresh from the brewery to tourists and others eager to drink deeply of local color from chilled bottles and mugs. Moreover, the brewpub law and the pervasive local culture have helped turn microbrewing into a thriving local hobby. Homebrewing has a long history in the Northwest, longer even than the moonshine stills of Appalachia or the backyard gins of the Great Depression. The Chinook word chinu, homemade liquor, is supposed to be the source of the slang term hooch. 6-packs can be broken up in Oregon. You don't have to buy all 6 beers. It is the kind of place where my supermarket checkout clerk has to check with her boss when I purchase single bottles of several brands of beer, to research the topic. A fun self-assignment for a book I am working on, to ask if beers from Oregon should be taken from the domestic per bottle price list and those from California and Washington from the sheet-labeled imports. The dominant beer style in the Northwest is the India Pale Ale, or IPA. IPAs differ from nationalized, that is corporation-owned, beers, which tend to be lagers and pilsners, in relation to the hoppiness of the beer. To some it is unpleasantly or pleasantly bitter, to others crisp and refreshing, and to those accustomed to the lighter beers brewed elsewhere, often initially nigh undrinkable, which itself is a result of measures taken by brewers in Victorian England to preserve English beers during their long sea voyages to India, thus also providing the name. IPAs seem to be strong in about 4 ways but so perfectly balanced that the result is still stable and drinkable, like sticks of firewood stacked into a conical pile held up by its own internal conflict. Of such things my father used to tell me they would put hair on my chest. There's my favorite from Lagunitas, Wilco Tango Foxtrot Ale, a malty, robust, jobless recovery ale, a joke in the title and another joke in the subtitle. I love this beer. It tastes smooth to me, but then my taste buds are used to a degree of harshness above and beyond those of most outside the Northwest. It tastes the most like pure beer to me, in a way that makes it possible for me to imagine I'm taking sepia-toned photographs and wearing loafers, riding out the Dust Bowl in a bathtub. Bob's your uncle. Total domination from Ninkasi Brewery in Eugene was interesting to watch. From a consumer standpoint, I took a chance on it when it was relatively rare on store shelves, and for about 2 months it seemed a private pleasure. Then it began turning up first in smaller grocery stores, then in the larger chain stores, then in gas stations. Now it might be the most ubiquitous beer on the coast that is brewed somewhere else. Of the brewers on the Oregon coast itself, Fort George in Astoria has taken an interesting tack to set itself apart. It is one of the few brewers to release beers in aluminum cans, rather than using the plastic networks of nooses that big brewers use and that strangle seafowl. The cans use an alternative packaging that holds the 4 packs together without killing animals, with a wit that shames the Surgeon General and his humorless health warnings. Brewers of the region aren't afraid to express themselves verbally. Beer labels raised perhaps not quite to the level of high art but well beyond the morbid slogans and catchphrase jokes of the big brewers. We are given obscure references, clever wordplay, riddles and mind games, forgotten fragments of weird history, notes on the brewing process, sardonic screeds against some aspect of the industry, no doubt a few inside jokes meant only to be comprehended by a select few drinkers. These last provide bountiful dry kindling for the imaginations of the uninitiated, as inside jokes often do to those on the outside. Correctly executed beer label gibberish is mysterious and outwardly wise, nonsensical, absurd, and sophomoric. Some of it makes sense as math. Many brewers print a beer's IBU rating, which measures the bitterness of a given beer due to the hops, and its specific gravity, a measure of its density, and the specific types of hops and malt used, the kinds of things aficionados appreciate. In other words, the brewers don't assume stupidity or ignorance on the part of their customers. a respect that is the polar opposite of ad campaigns meant to titillate and pacify consumers into buying mass-produced beer dumped into cans and bottles in industrial centers in the Midwest, beer that tastes to me now like processed vomit. Postscript: in the early morning hours at some campgrounds, noises rise from strange creatures of shadowy form, crouched over in the deepest bushes and crannies, the mighty heaves of over-inebriated campers. They are used to weak beer with low alcohol content and are now choking on our IPAs, which often have alcohol percentages approaching 10%. Care should be taken here. Crop circles on a beach. I am climbing to the top of a beach cliff to return to my truck parked at the viewpoint at the top, to return home to the campground and the trailer. It is an afternoon in winter that feels like an evening in summer. The sky is beyond overcast. Unbroken but thin cloud cover has given the beach the aura of a resort spa, a brilliant, pervasive soft glow, a triumph of dispersed light courtesy Mother Nature. An old man on the beach traces symbols in the sand with a stick. He drags the stick behind him, making smooth grooves in fine wet sand. I didn't notice him while I was down there, but from up here he forms a roving, crooked shadow that leaves a trail behind it, a moving line that leaves others, like a cursor. Sometimes he works freehand, sometimes he circles a central point to which his stick is attached by a frayed piece of dirty nylon rope torn from a washed-up fishing net. From up here, he is the central point, the only moving figure amongst the intricate curves and primal symbols he has created. The shapes and symbols don't spell anything or seem to have any literal meaning at all. Some are geometrical shapes with straight or perfectly arced lines, others made of squiggles and malformed gouges that resemble cuneiform, but I am too distant to decipher any of them anyway. He looks like an ancient surveyor at work, or the high leader of a solitary cult, drawing symbols in the sand for a rite beyond my comprehension. From the top of the cliff my angle is better and I can see the big picture more clearly. My cult leader has acquired a few disciples recruited from those passing by. 3 people have joined him. Their body language suggests that they don't know the man, only one another, and they have found sticks of their own. They add embellishments and new elements to the grand drawing, which is more random, more improvised, than I had previously imagined. They are doing all of this merely for the fun of it. I am tired and want only to go home, but I sit on a bench instead to watch their fun unfold. Half an hour passes, drawn by the activity. 2 separate photographers with tripods materialize. One of them has brought a dog who has been trained to loiter in the master's peripheries while he sets up. The tableau of sand remains undisturbed by pause. Again, from apologetic waves and animated but casual head nods and the way the photographers approach the old man to request permission, I can tell they are strangers to one another. The scene plays out easily and without subtext, merely another lazy afternoon at the beach. Here is a somewhat more adult version of sand castles, things made of sand for no evident reason, no hierarchy of decision makers, no industry, no paycheck waiting at the end. They make the symbols and patterns because they can, the spontaneous fun of freedom. It is the ephemeral nature of the art, if this impromptu play can be called art, which I believe it can, that keeps me watching. The things people create on, or in sand will never last very long. People know this going in. and I think the thrill of the implicitly doomed quality of their work imparts a freedom to play and experiment with zero consequences. Whatever is created will be destroyed by the end of the day anyway. That liberates them and is the reason behind the swirls that even at this distance I can discern in the body language. We may as well go nuts. As a photographer, I am not unaccustomed to the wrenchings of the gut associated with a missed opportunity. The light shifts unexpectedly, or I discover I've made an error in my calculations that others may not notice but I will see every time I look at my shot, glaring back at me like a victorious gremlin. But when I do get it right and grab the opportunity, I fiddle and fuss over it. Protect it with my life or risk my life to get it. I see a deep shade of pure black when I think I'll lose it. I might accidentally delete it or, worse, misplace the memory card that contains a whole week's work. The fun being had will leave no trace, and they all understand this going into it. The photographers might get a good shot or two, but otherwise no one profits nor is anyone hurt. The people on the beach below me know their work. Both their success and their failures will be wiped away by the next high tide. Sure as the orbit of the moon, it will be gone, and in an instant, the people scatter when the first big wave of the changing tide rolls in. Sticks dropped, bags hastily slung around shoulders, and a mad scamper for high ground. One of the photographers has been stranded atop a beach rock, his dog still at his side, now more nervous than attentive. The old man, surely a local, is the only one who doesn't have to hurry. He sits and watches from the stump of a beach log, throws his head back, and laughs while his work is washed into the sea.